Is Bring Me the Horizon important for the survival of metal? Here's an interesting question I saw a while back on Reddit after Bring Me the Horizon released their latest EP. Not the one that just came out, but the one before. Is Bring Me the Horizon important for the survival of metal? I'd like to explore that a little bit and see what the arguments for both sides could look like. Let's dive right in. Hi, I'm Mahmoud. I'm a producer and metal musician from Switzerland. This question gave me a bit to think about, and I constantly go back and forth with what I think the answer is, but maybe not for the reasons that you might be thinking. Here's a comment that I really liked, posted by the user Kenny Dr. Omega. Here's what they said. Metalcore has been around in some form or another since the early 90s. Bring Me the Horizon and Fit for a King might be its mainstream representatives, but if they disappeared, the genre as a whole wouldn't blink. There's always going to be some kid who hears a breakdown, thinks it's the coolest shit they have ever heard, and decides that's what they want to do. A lot of us metal fans were that kid at some point. Maybe it wasn't a breakdown, maybe it was a riff, but we all were there, and we all were there at that point, at some point. For me, it was hearing Metallica for the first time that made me want to explore heavier genres. I was maybe 10 years old or so, and it was something I had never heard, and it intrigued me, and down the rabbit hole I went. Kenny's statement will largely always be true. Some kid will hear a riff or a breakdown, fall in love with it, and metal lives on just as it did before. Just as it did before. Nothing new. The same riffs, the same structures, the same sounds. See where I'm going with this? Let's go into why I think Bring Me the Horizon is important for the genre, or at least bands like them and the philosophy they bring into the metal game. Let's get technical quickly. Metal producers have been using very similar sounding drums and guitar tones since the late 90s. They have been in use so much, people even know which drum samples will get you that 2000s metalcore sound, namely Kick 10 and Snare 12 by Steven Slade Drums. This is not a joke or exaggeration. These two samples for the bass drum and snare respectively, which are used to layer underneath the original drum sample and underneath the original drum performance for sonic enhancement, are all over metalcore. They sound great and convey a certain energy. There's nothing wrong with them. Another quick example. We've also used the same recording chain for guitars as well, namely a 5150 either by PV or EVH. Both work amazingly into a Mesa 4x12 cabinet with a V30 speaker mic'd with a Shure SM57. Why? Because it works. The listener expects a mix of these sounds, as do the bands. They expect those sounds because that's what they grew up with. Using these sounds will give you a bigger chance of getting a great sounding record. It works. Frankly, it sounds amazing, and few things will beat this combo of ingredients when it comes to modern metal tone. It's also boring to a certain extent, isn't it? This chain has been in use since the early 90s, thanks to Eddie Van Halen and the guitarists and producers that came after his signature amp was released. Metal production has largely stagnated. Yes, the mixes have gotten a lot better over the past 20 to 30 years, but really we still use mostly the same tricks and even plugins we used all those years ago. Why am I telling you all of this? Firstly, I am absolutely not a purist. I love drum samples and I think they are an important part of why modern productions sound the way they do. I also love that guitar sound. I am a kid of the 90s and 2000s after all. But I also believe that the reason rock and metal fell off so hard, in the mainstream at least, is because it stagnated, both when it comes to songwriting as well as production and arrangement. We are still using the same four ingredients to make rock music that we used 50 years ago. It's not an inherently bad thing, but how is rock and metal supposed to reinvent itself and push the envelope if those ingredients, being drums, bass, guitars, and vocals, maybe the occasional synth, never change? Here's where a band like Bring Me the Horizon or a band with similar philosophy, maybe such as Bad Omens or Sleep Token, comes in. They are very much not afraid to change things up in metal. The synths and choirs you hear all over metalcore these days, Bring Me the Horizon started doing that over 10 years ago on their album There's a Hell. The electronic elements you hear in metalcore, same answer, if not even before on certain songs in their catalog, which I am admittedly not that familiar with. Soon after they did that, metalcore started to incorporate those same ideas into their music, at which point Bring Me the Horizon was already moving on into new sounds again. What other new stuff did they try which metalcore didn't bring before them? More synths, completely EDM-based songs, even featuring people like the legendary beatboxer Rahzel in one of their songs. Hell, featuring bands like Baby Metal and exploring D&B sounds is not off limits to them. And that's just the surface level stuff. Let's talk about their attitude towards songwriting. To them, the song is always king. No overlong songs, everything is calculated and measured. They push the envelope, not by writing necessarily complex music, but through enhancing their already existing song by layering it with intricate arrangements. More vocals, more synths, strings, beats, guitars, loops, you name it. Chances are they have it in their songs. They are largely pop songs in structure with certain outfits. Sometimes it's metal, metalcore, or even thrash. Other times it's straight up EDM or just a ballad. All of those points will still hold true regardless. I wouldn't call their arrangements maximalist, because it truly isn't. The song is king to them. And if a simpler arrangement works better, they seemingly go with that. Through pushing all of these sonic boundaries, their productions sound unique, at least to me they do. They have a different feeling than any of their contemporaries, and the numbers speak for themselves. They are the biggest metalcore band right now, by a huge margin. They are featuring huge artists on their songs, people like Youngblood and Halsey, for example. What they're doing is, in my opinion, incredibly important for metal. They are bringing in new listeners. They are making different production styles okay for the audience. Trap beats in metal, technosynths, beatboxing. All is good in this version of metal. New ingredients, and if the audience likes it, chances are that some bands will too. And then those other bands will incorporate new styles into their own music, whichever style it may be. And they will get their own chance at pushing the envelope, just like Bring Me the Horizon did before them. Just like other huge bands did before Bring Me the Horizon. If you look at today's most successful genre, which I would say is by a large margin hip-hop, it reinvents itself every 7 to 10 years. Every few years, there's new rappers headlining rap festivals, new artists, fresh blood, fresh sounds. We could have all of that in metal too. Now, all of that has a counter argument. Let's look at that. Broadly speaking, the metal scene doesn't want that. Metalheads want bands that sound like Slayer, Iron Maiden, Metallica, Sugar. They don't want EDM moments in their songs, and they don't want rap features. They want fast drums, distorted guitars, someone that screams or sings or grunts or growls or all of these things. some thundering bass, the occasional guitar solo or breakdown. That's it. They will tolerate some synthesizers here and there, but not all of them. The listeners know exactly what they like, even going as far as really loving some forms of metal while never listening to other subgenres. One could even argue that because metal is already so diverse, it doesn't need new sounds. Those four ingredients have brought us music that sounds like Black Sabbath, as well as Meshuggah, Metallica, Slayer, Iron Maiden, Architects, all the way to Limp Bizkit, and Slipknot, to Avenged Sevenfold, and Killswitch Engage, and Trivium, to August Burns Red, to Periphery, Tesseract. All those subgenres ranging from classic heavy metal all the way to extreme death metal, power metal, thrash, prog, gent, metalcore, you name it. All those feature those four ingredients. And they work. And we love them. And they've never sounded better than they do now. Even black metal manages to sound like a proper record these days. And that's saying a lot. The core audience of metal hasn't moved much. We won some in the late 90s, lost some later on, but that's just the ebb and flow of it. Metal is still here, and it's here to stay, I would say. Maybe not as much in the mainstream, but it's not going away. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't need to fix it because clearly the listeners don't think it's broken. Otherwise, the festivals would try to book new headliners these days, which they don't. Maybe the answer is larger than metal. At this point for me, the answer to is Bring Me the Horizon important for the survival of metal is no. They aren't. But they are certainly important for pushing what's okay within the genre. Regardless of their existence, metal will still live on. Maybe it will stay the same for the foreseeable future. Maybe some new trends emerge. Who knows? But the average metal fan will still go see these bands until they don't. Thank you so much for watching. I hope my arguments made sense, even if they are for both sides. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd be curious to see what you think about metal and where it's going and what bands like Bring Me the Horizon are contributing. Thank you so much for watching again, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.